Maya Torres tightened the strap of her apron as she stepped out from the kitchen doors of the Crown and Ledger, balancing a tray of polished glasses. She was only 3 shifts into this new job, still memorizing the rhythm of the dining room, still catching her breath whenever the maitre d' barked for precision. It was the kind of restaurant where perfection was expected, where the napkins were folded sharp as origami and where one misplaced wine glass could send a manager into a spiral. Maya had taken the job to cover rent while finishing her last semester of night classes in hospitality law. The hours were long, the customers demanding, but she had learned to keep her head down and let words roll off her like water. The staff, though, seemed unusually restless that evening. Conversations cut short whenever the clock ticked past 9. 2 waiters whispered nervously near the bar, pretending to wipe glasses but clearly looking at the front doors. Even the maitre d', a man famous for his stiff posture and calm authority, shifted uneasily, straightening his tie for the 4th time. Maya set her tray down and asked quietly, "What's going on?" No one answered right away. Instead, the hostess leaned close and muttered under her breath, "Langston." Maya frowned. "Langston who?" The maitre d' gave her a look as if she had just asked who the president was. "Victor Langston. Billionaire. Every staff member in this city knows the name. When he dines, someone loses their job. Every time." Before Maya could process that, the double doors swung open. Victor Langston entered like he owned not just the restaurant but the air itself. Tall, silver-haired, wrapped in a charcoal suit that shimmered faintly under the chandeliers, he carried himself with the polished arrogance of a man who had never heard the word no. 2 men in tailored suits followed behind him, silent, carrying tablets. Langston didn't so much as glance at the maitre d'. Instead, he tapped his watch and said, 9:03. 2 minutes late on seating. Your clock is wrong, or your staff is. The maitre d' bowed quickly and gestured toward a corner booth reserved for VIPs. Maya noticed the way the staff melted away from the room's center as he walked in, like the tide retreating from the shore. No one wanted to be in his path. She stood still for a second, caught between trays and tables, unsure whether to follow the unspoken rule to vanish too. But it was already too late. Langston's gaze swept across the room, sharp and predatory, until it landed on her. A slow smirk tugged at his mouth. He lifted one finger, pointing directly. The new one. The one who looks like she borrowed her uniform from a thrift store. You'll do. Heat crawled up Maya's neck. She heard the soft intake of breath from the other waiters, the silent warnings in their eyes. No one argued with him, they had said. No one survived serving him. But his stare pinned her like a hawk pinning prey, and walking away wasn't an option. So she picked up her notepad, smoothed her apron, and walked over to the booth. Victor didn't wait for her greeting. He snapped his fingers toward the empty table. First, water. Exactly 6 cubes of ice. Not 5, not 7. If you don't count, I will. Maya nodded once, keeping her voice even. 6 cubes. Yes, sir. His smirk deepened. Oh, you're polite. Let's see how long that lasts. My meal will be 7 courses. I want the soup at exactly 57 degrees Fahrenheit, the steak trimmed into perfect hexagons, and the dessert served with the candle already lit but not dripping wax. And you, he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a mock whisper, are not allowed to write any of this down. If you were worth your salt, you'd remember. If not, well, you'll be back in whatever neighborhood that accent of yours crawled out of. Maya kept her face steady, though her pulse quickened. She repeated the order softly, detail by detail, until she reached the end. Then she closed her notepad without ever writing a word, looked him in the eye, and said, "Understood." He blinked, surprised by the lack of hesitation. "We'll see." He leaned back, pulling out his phone as though she had already failed. His assistants exchanged amused glances, one even shaking his head as if he'd already seen the ending. In the kitchen, the cooks crowded close when Maya recited the order word for word, not missing a single absurd detail. One of them muttered, "You're insane. Nobody memorizes Langston's games. You'll be gone by tomorrow." "Maybe," Maya answered, steadying the tray, "but I'm not here to play his games." Back on the floor, Langston was already making sport of her absence. He raised his voice so the room could hear, laughing to his companions. She's probably in the back crying. They always cry. Weak hands, weak minds. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, their forks paused mid-bite. The waitstaff kept their eyes down, too used to this spectacle to react. But when Maya returned, balancing the tray with calm precision, she set the glass before him with exactly 6 cubes clinking inside, placed the soup gently in front of him, and held a thermometer in her other hand. 57 degrees, just as you asked. The table went silent. Langston glanced at the thermometer, then back at her, searching for a crack in her composure. Beginner's luck. He tasted the soup, finding no fault, though his lips tightened at the perfection. One of his assistants chuckled. She actually pulled it off. Langston shot him a glare that silenced the laugh instantly. Then he turned back to Maya, upping the cruelty. Fine. Pour the wine. Slowly. No spills. Not a drop wasted. And don't dare breathe while you do it. Maya uncorked the bottle with practiced ease. The liquid shimmered under the chandelier light as she poured, steady and smooth. She set the bottle down with a quiet thud and finally let her voice cut through the silence. Respect isn't a luxury, sir. It's the bare minimum. If you can't manage that, you can pour your own glass. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then came a faint gasp from one table, a nervous laugh from another. And then, soft but real, a few claps from a corner where a pair of young influencers had been recording discreetly with their phones. Langston's face hardened, color rising to his cheeks. He leaned forward, voice low but sharp enough to cut. What did you just say to me? Maya didn't flinch. I said respect is the bare minimum. And I don't serve anyone who treats people like they're disposable. The influencers grinned wide, their cameras catching every word. One whispered, "This is gold." Langston tapped his watch again, louder this time, as though trying to summon authority. Manager. Fire her. Now. The maitre d' hesitated, torn between survival and decency. He opened his mouth, but before a word could come out, another customer stood abruptly from a nearby table, staring at Maya and then at Langston. "Excuse me," the man said firmly, "but maybe the problem here isn't the waitress. Do you know who I am?" His voice cracked across the restaurant, sharp and commanding, the kind of tone that usually bent people into silence. But this time, no one moved. The man standing from the nearby table, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, dressed in a clean but modest suit, did not flinch. He adjusted his glasses calmly and said, "I don't care who you are. What I see is a grown man bullying someone who's just doing her job." A ripple of whispers spread across the dining room. Maya stood frozen at the booth, her hands still resting lightly on the wine bottle, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She hadn't expected anyone to speak up, much less a customer. Langston's eyes narrowed into slits as he turned his full glare on the man. "You must be out of your mind. Sit down before I buy this place and have you escorted out." The man didn't budge. Threats don't change facts. Everyone in this room just watched her handle your order with more grace than you deserve. Maybe you should sit down and think about what that says about you. The boldness of the statement drew a few gasps, but more clapping followed this time, hesitant at first, then louder. The influencers in the corner leaned forward with their phones raised higher now, one whispering, "It's already trending. I can feel it." Langston's hand slammed onto the table, rattling the cutlery. "Enough. This is my city. My name on half the towers downtown. When I say someone's fired, they're gone. I'll have her blacklisted in every restaurant if I want." Maya finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You don't own people, Mr. Langston. You can buy buildings and companies, but you can't buy dignity." Her words landed like steady blows, not shouted but clear enough for everyone to hear. For a moment, Langston just stared at her, nostrils flaring, mouth opening and closing without sound. He was used to fear, to groveling, to instant obedience. He wasn't prepared for resistance, let alone resistance in public. His assistants shifted uncomfortably beside him, one whispering something under his breath about optics. Langston's voice dropped lower, his anger coiled like a spring. You think you're brave? You're nothing. When this night is over, you'll wish you'd never spoken to me. But Maya didn't answer him this time. She simply stepped back, folding her hands neatly in front of her apron, her expression neutral. It was the silence that unsettled him most, the refusal to engage further, to give him the satisfaction of fear. Around the restaurant, phones were lifted higher. Guests whispered, "Is this really happening?" And, "That girl's fearless." The waitress stood rigid at the edge of the scene, his loyalty torn between his staff and the billionaire whose name could destroy businesses overnight. Finally, one of the influencers couldn't hold back. She called across the room, "Hey, Mr. Langston, smile for the camera. The internet's going to love this." Langston's head snapped toward her, his composure fraying. "Put that down. None of you have permission to film me." But it was too late. Clips were already flying across apps, tagged with captions like, "Waitress puts billionaire in his place," and "Victor Langston exposed." Within minutes, hashtags began to build, unnoticed by Langston as he seethed in the corner booth. The manager finally approached, sweat glistening at his temples. "Sir, perhaps we should." Langston cut him off. "Don't you dare defend her. You think a little applause changes anything? She's finished." He jabbed a finger toward Maya, but his voice was louder than he realized, echoing across the restaurant for every phone to catch. "I could crush her with a single call." Maya inhaled slowly, grounding herself before she answered. "Maybe you can. Or maybe the world will see exactly who you are when those calls get played back on every screen tomorrow." The clapping grew stronger this time, less hesitant, more united. The man who had first stood in her defense added, "Looks like the world already is." Langston's jaw clenched. For the first time that night, he looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man cornered in his own game. He shoved back from the booth, standing abruptly. "We're leaving." His chair scraped harshly against the floor, but as he stormed toward the exit, the chorus of cameras followed him like a spotlight he couldn't escape. In the sudden quiet that followed, Maya felt the weight of every gaze land on her. Her knees trembled, though she kept her shoulders square. The manager opened his mouth, perhaps to scold her, perhaps to praise her, but the matron stepped forward first. "Maya," he said softly, "go take a break." She nodded and slipped through the kitchen doors, not realizing yet that her face was already being replayed thousands of times on screens across the city. By the time her shift ended and she walked out into the cool night, her phone buzzed with notifications. Friends, classmates, even distant cousins she hadn't heard from in years were sending her links. The headline was already clear. "Waitress stands up to Victor Langston, restaurant erupts." Clips showed her steady voice, the wine glass, the line about respect. She stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the screen as comments scrolled by faster than she could read them. "Legend." Finally, someone told him off. "Protect this queen at all costs." Maya's fingers trembled as she slid the phone back into her pocket. She hadn't done it for attention, hadn't even thought beyond that moment in the dining room. But the internet had decided for her. She was no longer anonymous. Across town, Victor Langston sat in the back of a sleek black car, rage radiating off him in waves. His assistant held up a tablet, murmuring, "It's already at 3 million views, sir. By morning, it'll be everywhere." Langston snatched the tablet, scrolling furiously. Headlines screamed back at him, mocking his power. Comments piled beneath each clip, most of them merciless. He tossed the device onto the seat and barked, "Damage control. Call the PR team. Now." The assistant hesitated before asking, "And the board?" "They've already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow." Langston's eyes burned with fury, but beneath the anger, a sliver of fear crept in. He wasn't used to being the one under a spotlight he couldn't control. Back in her apartment, Maya sat cross-legged on her small couch, scrolling through the tidal wave of messages. One video played on loop, her standing tall, her voice steady as she told him, "Respect isn't a luxury. It's the bare minimum." She whispered the words again to herself, half in disbelief. Her roommate poked her head out of the bedroom. "Maya, do you realize you just broke the internet?" Maya let out a shaky laugh. I didn't mean to. I just couldn't let him. She stopped, shaking her head. It wasn't right. Maybe not, her roommate said, but everyone out there thinks it was more than right. They're calling you a hero. The words sat heavy in Maya's chest. She wasn't sure she believed it. All she knew was that the world had seen her stand her ground, and now the world wasn't looking away. And as dawn crept closer, the balance of power between one billionaire and one waitress had already begun to shift in ways neither of them could fully imagine. Maya didn't have to search for it. The noise reached her phone in relentless waves. Messages from strangers thanking her for standing up to the bully, reporters asking for interviews, invitations to talk shows. She sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, her coffee untouched, staring at the flood of emails while her roommate scrolled beside her in awe. You're not just trending, her roommate said, eyes wide. You're the story. Every network, every feed. They're calling it a cultural moment. Maya rubbed her temples, her exhaustion heavy. I didn't plan this. I just wanted to do my job. That's exactly why they love you, her roommate replied. You weren't trying to go viral. You were just decent. And that's rare enough to shake people. Meanwhile, across town in a gleaming glass tower that bore his name, Victor Langston walked into the boardroom with the stiffness of a man marching to trial. He wore the same tailored suit, the same expensive watch, but the air around him had shifted. Screens mounted on the walls glowed with headlines. Investors question Langston leadership, Langston PR crisis deepens, public outrage grows. The board members sat in a tense semicircle, their faces grave. One of them, a gray-haired woman with the authority of decades in finance, broke the silence. Victor, this is catastrophic. The video is everywhere. Sponsors are pulling out. Shareholders are demanding answers. Langston waved a dismissive hand, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. It's a blip. Internet noise. It'll blow over once we release a statement. But another board member shook his head. This isn't noise. This is an avalanche. Employees are speaking out, saying your behavior has been toxic for years. It's not just one waitress anymore. It's your entire reputation collapsing in real time. Langston's voice hardened. I built this company. Without me, none of you would be sitting in this room. The gray-haired woman leaned forward. And without change, none of us will be sitting here much longer. The market has spoken. The people have spoken. It's over, Victor. We're calling a vote. For the first time in years, the word over pierced through his armor. He tried to argue, tried to bark threats, but the room had already turned. One by one, hands lifted, voices firm. The decision was unanimous. Victor Langston was to step down as CEO, effective immediately. The man who had once walked into restaurants expecting staff to scatter was now escorted out of his own building, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. His driver opened the car door, but Victor hesitated on the curb, staring at the crowd. For the first time, he realized they weren't afraid of him. They were watching him fall. Back at the Crown and Ledger, the restaurant where everything had started, the staff gathered in hushed excitement. The maitre d' held up his phone, reading aloud an article, Victor Langston removed as CEO amid viral scandal. The line drew cheers from the waiters and cooks, their relief palpable. Someone whispered, Maya did this. She really did. Maya herself walked in a few moments later, nervous from the attention, her uniform folded neatly in her hands. She had come to return it, unsure if she still had a job after the chaos of the previous night. The manager approached her cautiously, but before he could speak, the maitre d' stepped forward with a smile. You don't return that uniform, Maya. You honor it. Because you gave all of us courage last night. She looked down, shaking her head. I don't know if I deserve that. I just said what needed to be said. That's exactly why you deserve it, the manager replied. You stood your ground when no one else would. And now everyone's talking about dignity because of you. Before Maya could answer, the restaurant doors opened and a small team of officials entered. They weren't dressed like diners. They carried folders and badges. One of them, a woman in a sharp navy blazer, approached Maya directly. Miss Torres? I'm Karen Mitchell, City Compliance Division. We've been reviewing hospitality standards across the district, and last night, you gave us more evidence than any report could. We'd like to offer you a position with our office." Maya blinked in shock. "Me? But I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Mitchell interrupted gently. "You're exactly the kind of voice we need. Someone who understands service, who understands fairness. Someone who won't be intimidated." The staff broke into applause, genuine and unrestrained. Maya felt her throat tighten, her eyes burning with tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. In one night, she had gone from invisible to indispensable. News crews arrived shortly after, capturing the moment as Maya stood among her co-workers, the offer letter in her hands. A reporter called out, "Maya, how does it feel to take down one of the most powerful men in the city?" She thought for a moment, then answered simply, "I didn't take him down. He did that himself. I just refused to let him take me with him." The clip spread just as quickly as the first one, solidifying her as more than a viral moment. She was now a symbol. Commentators praised her courage, business leaders cited her words in meetings, and activists held signs reading "Respect isn't a luxury." A week later, Maya returned to the Crown and Ledger, no longer in uniform but in a professional blazer, her badge clipped neatly to her side. She walked through the same dining room where she had once trembled under Victor's gaze. This time, staff greeted her with smiles and nods of admiration. The man who had defended her that night rose from his table and clapped as she passed, others joining in until the room filled with applause. She paused, overwhelmed, and the maitre leaned close, whispering with pride. She stood her ground, and the world stood with her. Maya smiled, her heart steady now. For the first time, she truly believed it. And with that, the story of a waitress who refused to bow became the story of a woman who reminded an entire city what dignity looked like.
And that was the story of Maya, the waitress who stood her ground against a billionaire and showed the world the true value of dignity. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little courage today, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel.